There we go.
Hey,
Yep.
what's up, Doghouse Show?
Hey, buddy.
We can talk now. I like to try and bring people in at 8 instead of 7, not because like I want to talk to them, but like, it takes like an hour to like build up your viewers, and like,
I get you. I know how it goes.
and I don't want to I don't want someone to come in and be like, oh, he's got 24 views, like that's cool, I guess, And then at the same time, like I don't want other people to miss the content, but like fuck it, you're here, you're excited, you're ready to go. What's good, dude? How you been?
I've been good, man. Shit. That's the thing is I was gonna come in. I was like, I had the food defrosting out, and I was like, you know what? Let me try to come in and see if I can come in a little early, and get our hour in a little earlier. So yeah, no, for sure, yeah. So I've been just chilling, man. I was laid off for a couple of weeks. Did the capitalism thing and found me a new job, like
Nice.
like most people should do.
So I vaguely remember you because about a year ago, when we were itty bitty little baby streamers, I went and hung out with CTV, or maybe it was Demon Machine. I'm not sure.
I think it was Demon Machine. I think that's where I remember you from. Yeah.
I think we've spoken once or twice in the past. And then I haven't seen you or anything. Like, have you been gone? Like, where you been? You been streaming
So
this
for
whole
the
time?
No. So I always give like kind of the spiel that I'm the streamer that streams about once a year because typically that's how my luck has been with jobs. So usually when I'm unemployed, I'm like, you know what, screw it. Let me go ahead and stream. I got nothing better to do. Once you apply for a few jobs, you're pretty much shit out of luck for the day. So, but yeah, I stream about once a year. I just went on like a 2-week streaming spree. And then I ended up getting this job, and it's like absorbed my every minute. And then of course, me being a father and a husband, that takes like up the rest of my post 5 o'clock. So I can't get on any of like the actual panels, and that's why I told you I'm like I can barely do an hour, just because of all the stuff that I got going on. So,
why don't you introduce yourself and who you are to my community?
Yeah, so I'm the Doghouse Show. I'm one of the most reasonable based conservatives on Twitch. Sorry, CTV. It's the truth. And I kind of approach politics in a different way than most conservatives. Most conservatives come off of the Fox like pipeline, and they'll try to like spout off a bunch of like Fox News conservative talking points. I come at it from like just a rational perspective. I have a core base of principles, and I kind of work off of that. I'll also look at like, someone makes a absurd ass claim. Usually I'll go into it and try to figure out, is it true? Typically 9 times out of 10, if someone makes a very hyperbolic claim, it's almost always false. And
we were
so
seeing
that's
that
why
on Twitter. Pisco is like yelling at me as we speak on Twitter because I accused Dylan Burns of misinformation, and he's like, "No, it's not misinformation. You just disagree on policy." And I'm like, "What fucking policy?" Like, neither him nor Dylan Burns have read the bill, obviously.
that's something that irritates the crap out of me too, is that like when you can clearly tell what they were aiming for, and then they'll try to pivot and be like, oh well, I wasn't really talking about that, or they'll be like, well, technically I was right. It's like, okay, technicalities, like close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades. Like this isn't like we know what you really meant. You're trying to get the gotcha on the Republicans, be like, see, gotcha, but you didn't read the bill. And I just had an interesting conversation with some people before, and someone
after this,
else's
we're definitely
Discord.
going to go through the bill chat. We'll go through 7990, and 7990 is the only one that's out. 7991 isn't out. We only have what different people have said about the bill, but nobody has really disagreed about the details of the bill, so it should be a short and simple bill to explain.
Are you talking about the one that? So I do have a link to Are you talking about the first bill, the one that was like majority Republican?
So there's two bills. 7990 is the one that like 100 Republicans or so didn't vote on, right? And then there's the one that 9 didn't vote on. And as of I checked like midday, it's still not available. That's the one that basically expanded the companies that the WIC will approve for formula. And that was the one that nine Republicans didn't vote on. It's like Thomas Massey and then like and then the usual kind of firebrand subjects. And everybody else voted for that bill. But we don't have a copy of that bill unless you found one in the last couple hours.
I did, but it was on
like I was on Ballotpedia and they said that it wasn't available yet publicly.
Yeah, it wasn't publicly available. I found it somewhere. I'd have to look for it, but yeah, the way I read it and understood it, if it's the one that it seems like, is it just basically expands WIC for emergency situations and gives like off-brand access or something like that. But yeah, like that's the thing about like reading these bills though, is like most of these bills people haven't read, and like reading through this. So there's two parts to this. The second bill that everybody's up in arms about, like, oh my God, first of all, they're going off of that little chyron at the top that says, you know, that
120 Republicans didn't vote, and it's like, and they wanted to stop babies from getting their formula, and so everybody's freaking out about it. Yeah.
And then what's wild too is that when you look at then there was the other ironic thing, which was that the person who actually has started this massive Twitter firestorm, he actually tweeted out a picture from the one where a majority of Republicans actually voted in favor of formula. So it's wild to me, and this is something I was talking to somebody in another Discord about, was how is having an uninformed voter base, not saying legally, okay, and I'm not even really like trying to say more like that this should, you know, I think it's a net negative when you have a bunch of people that act in this manner voting.
Paul's Dano's calling you out right now. He says, I thought you weren't allowed to be on stream. He's only allowed to be here for an hour during time.
Yeah, no, hold on. So Danabo. Listen, buddy, I'm here for an hour, okay? Your show on Friday takes 3 fucking hours for a parent, okay? That's a lot of fucking time. My wife is like sweating by the end of the day, okay? And you as a parent know damn well how this goes. When you're a parent, like after like when the spouse has to take care of the child for 3 hours, they're exhausted, okay? Especially my son, he's almost 2, so he's in that phase where he's like super destructive and into everything.
Sorry to interrupt you. Wee woo Twitch.
No, it's okay.
Up. You know, Danabo's always fucking lurking everywhere.
Oh yeah, I know.
It doesn't matter where you are. If you say something base enough or something, Danabo just comes out of the woodwork. Like, I've been here the whole time. You're like, God damn it.
Yeah. But yeah, so like the one thing is that like I was trying to think about it, I'm like, you know, when you have people like that, I think it's a net negative. And I think that the society we're in now, where we have all this access to information, you would think it'd make us a better, more informed voter base, but it almost feels like it makes it more of a lazy voter base, where you can just go online, see a little snippet of like a picture, and you're like, oh, look, see, the Republicans voted against it without you don't have to do anything. You could stop at that picture and you can vote based on that picture. And to me, I think that's a net negative. Now,
you're talking to anarcho-capitalists, right?
Probably. Yeah. So, I mean,
our opinion is more radical than yours, which is even the informed voter shouldn't be able to fucking vote, much less the uninformed voter. But I'd be interested, like, because you don't have a lot of time, and I feel like to do my due diligence for my community, which is something we kind of like. There's kind of like, you know, I don't want to say it's a litmus or purity test, but I am interested, right? Because you said you have these baseline conservative values, and that you feel like you're not necessarily playing party politics, but you're attempting to maintain these values and then, you know, stop the spread of misinformation and bullshit and like kind of get to the crux of things from a good policy position. Well, what are those principles, those values that you feel like justifies good governance from a conservative position?
Yeah, absolutely. So my main thing, and specifically to businesses, because this is something that recently happened with COVID, is that my core principle for businesses is that businesses should be able to operate how they feel as long as it's within the legal confines of the law. And so that's kind of my core principle. And I have to add that little caveat at the end, because to sit there and say saying, oh, well, businesses should be able to operate freely, well, then that ignores the fact that we currently have laws in place. So I think, and that's something else I hold as a value, is that we should obey laws to a certain degree. And so that kind of goes into another bit of my conservative value, I guess. And the other aspect of it is too, with personal freedom, is that there are God-given or natural rights that we are endowed. And some people, this is something I've found that is actually really interesting, is that some people don't believe that they exist. These things are handed to us by government. Yeah. And so to me, I believe that there are certain rights that we are given to naturally or God-given if you're a Christian or you believe in God. And so that's another conservative value. The other thing is that just based on my pure opinions of some of these topics like gun rights or abortion or, whatever, like almost all of them tend to sway more towards the conservative side on a pure idealistic standpoint. But when we get into the more narrow topics, for example, things like COVID, right? And I don't want to get too much into it because I know how Twitch and everything can be. There are certain topics with COVID that
it's okay. I'm willing to bet that as deep as you're going to go into it, we've gone harder.
Probably. And it's like one of those things where like I try to sit there and I listen to, I guess you could say, my side talk about these things, and I'm like, I don't know if this is necessarily right. And when I dig into it, 9 times out of 10 what they're saying is usually, again, like we've had with what happened with Dylan, they twist things. And I'm like, listen, I'm trying to hold down, and I've been called a leftist because of my stance on COVID. And I'm sitting here, I'm like, listen guys, I have a base core principle and I'm sticking to it. So for me, if a business wants to enforce, for their business, a vaccine mandate, let that be their business, as long as it's within the confines of the law. Now, if the government comes in and says, hey, we want to do this, well, guess what then? Then we need to evaluate, is what the government's doing necessary? Is it reasonable? Does it make any sense? We have to be very highly critical when the government tries to step in and say, let's take care of this. And so I think based on all of that, I have to side, and this is where conservatives I see sometimes flip-flop, is one minute they want businesses to be able to do what they want, but then the next they're like, whoa, we don't want this. It's like, whoa, hold on, listen. As long as it's with the and I'm willing to have, if you don't like it and you want to go, I'm fully with you. Go to the government and control and vote. I'm all for that. So if you don't like the laws in place,
control instead of vote,
right,
which is exactly what it is. But yeah, no, I think that's not a position that we've never had. I mean, I think we've always been, pro individual liberty and pro private property. And so like the way that we fundamentally develop rights, right? And so maybe it'd be interesting to see why you disagree with this, because when I hear from Christians, oh, I have fundamentally God-given rights, what I don't understand is how they're for government, because to me, those fundamentally God-given rights are against the state, full stop. Right? Because to me, I believe, right, in something that's we both believe in what we would call natural law, right? Which is like a deontological position if you look at it morally, but it's not a moral system, it's a descriptive legal system that says that human beings fundamentally have certain rights. Now, we justify them from argumentation ethics and, for pro-life, not anti-life positions, that one accepts a norm of nonviolence, and how do we reduce conflict, right? You would simply say, well, they come from God. So my question is, do you believe that you have the right of self-ownership? You have the right to your own body? I would assume, obviously.
Generally, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, so my question then is, like, I don't understand why so many conservatives, and this is why I think it's breaking apart, maybe part of it is just leftists have always been consequentialists, right? Thought, rights come from the government, and the social contract theory and progress is like, something we negotiate with from a norm, from an ethical position of like, what are the consequences of the action, which is why like they're like, no, vaccine everybody because like in the end it's better, and it's like, well, you don't fucking know, right? And that's the problem with consequential, you don't really know what happens. But I mean, my question is like, how do you believe in taxation that's like, how do you believe that the government can steal the fruits of your labor and what you've done with your body and make a slave of you? And how do you believe in like authoritarian government control over people as a Christian? I like, how do you marry those two?
Yeah, so I actually wrestled with this thought before, because one of the things is that like, what's the use for government if there's certain God-given rights? And to kind of get to the point of what I felt was that there are certain things that happen in a society when someone violates those rights that have to be assessed. And the government, to me, is not supposed to be something that is overly powerful to where they're controlling our lives and determining necessarily what our rights are. Rather, they are trying to be the supposed to be the scale of justice, right? That's the judicial branch, but trying to govern that aspect, those gray areas where, yeah, we may have a general right to life, for example, but what happens when two people are arguing and one shoots somebody? Well, then we have a dilemma here, right, that has to be addressed in society, and saying this person violated this other person's right to life, but on the self-defense side, this person then reacted and violated that person's necessarily right to life. So we have to have a court system that can parse through that and determine who was, I guess you could say, morally but also legally right in a way. So this is still something I'm kind of playing with, because the one thing I'm not very strong on is trying to speak from like a philosophical standpoint.
Right.
That's not my strong suit. And what I try to do is try to steer kind of away from it, because I kind of want to follow what seems right to me. There is obviously some core beliefs, but I've never really dug super deep into it. I've kind of just basically...
I'm telling you, you should check out some RoeVWade and some Hoppe. Hoppe might scare you because he's super red-pilled. And when I say red-pilled, I don't mean like libertarian anarchist pilled, which he is, but I mean like red-pilled. Yeah. He's a hardcore conservative. But I mean, you should check out some readings, because I think the way that you describe the state is obviously not anarchist, but is one of a night watchman state. Right, like the state is supposed to be there to protect us from invasions, and it's supposed to, protect private property rights, and it's supposed to protect like life and liberty within the state, and it shouldn't be doing anything else.
Essentially, and
maybe you have some gray areas in there, but I don't know, man. You sound more like a paleo lib to me than a conservative, which might explain why you're clashing with the conservatives, because
libertarian, not liberal,
right? Like, because you're clashing, I think, with the conservatives, because I think the conservatives have a certain core set of values and not necessarily a core set of principles, and so they're fine with those things that they call principles until it goes against their values. And I think Florida's a perfect example of this, right? Is we have a corrupt education system that for 60 years has been kind of overrun with Marxists, right? And, and they've created critical pedagogy and critical theory and critical race theory and critical legal studies. And now they're doing social emotional learning and transformative social emotional learning. And like Republicans completely ignore all of the government, all of the corruption for the last 60 years, completely unaware of it. Don't care that the state is indoctrinating their children in school. But then once it starts getting into gender issues, all of a sudden they're like, we have to use the power of the state to stop this. And it's like, well, what's going on here?
Yeah, and one thing I think that's kind of a huge misconception, and maybe this is a segue, but like when I've been doing a lot of in-depth research onto like Roe v. Wade, for example, I find that a lot of people sit there and go, oh, well, guess what, Republicans, we got you. If you want to, lift up abortion, well then, or if you want to put down abortion, then you have to enforce the nanny state. It's like, okay, well, first of all, not all Republicans are necessarily against government programs to a certain degree. And the thing you have to look at too is like, we could look at things like Texas, for example. There was a Texas House representative that was a Republican, and he actually shared saying, hey, look, we have these programs called the Alternatives to Abortion program that help mothers materially with car seats, diapers, all these other material goods, not just money, but actual goods. And I think that's the important thing too, is that when we look at these programs, us as Republicans, we're not necessarily against some of these programs all flat out. Right, yeah. We're not necessarily against those particular programs. It's rather, what are those programs? What are they targeting? Again, going back to my reasonableness test, I guess you could say. Because again, when you sit there, the proposals that the left is proposing are things like Medicare for all or free college. We're the party of the means test, okay? We're the literal means test party here, where we have a set bar if you want it. So when you throw something at us that says everybody can have it, of course we're against that, because it's not targeting anything. To me, at least, it's not reasonable. You're not really attacking the core issue. And so to your earlier question about taxes, I think the way that I can kind of justify it in a way is, well, one, the tax code is so extreme, to try to overturn it at this point is going to be very, very difficult. Okay, I'm not saying because it's difficult we shouldn't, but the way that it's been kind of justified in a way is that we also have a lot of benefits that a lot of people aren't even aware of, especially on lower income. And I tell this to people all the time. When people talk about single mothers, you don't realize how many tax benefits are given. Specifically, when they mention single mothers, they're usually talking about the lower income bracket that are given to single mothers. Besides the child care, besides the child themselves, besides the fact that you're in a lower tax bracket, so you're already probably paying lower taxes, then that lower income generally qualifies you for a bunch of other government benefits. And so yeah, exactly. And so that's something that, like, you know, for me, the way I justify it is by saying, well, there are ways to essentially get that money back. Now, granted, I also understand that in order for our government to operate now, it doesn't have to be this way, but it is this way now, is that there has to be some kind of funding going into it somewhere. You know, obviously someone, yeah.
So this is, I think, where we find the massive distinction between libertarian philosophy and conservative philosophy. And so there's a joke we often say as libertarians against conservatives, which is, you know, conservatives are progressives going the speed limit. Because, you know, what is reasonable is often an arbitrary line, right? And it always is an arbitrary line unless it's based upon axiomatic positions. And so the conservative says, whoa, 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 whoa. Why do people keep saying I'm super quiet? Like I'll cut it up on the BS. So what is reasonable is often, you know, is essentially arbitrary. And this is the problem, I think, with conservatism, which is that it doesn't have axiomatic positions. Instead, what it has is, whoa. So I think the best thing I've ever seen of an explanation of conservative philosophy, like deeply, deeply conservative philosophy, is actually from Angels and Demons, the movie, right? Ewan McGregor, when he's the priest and he talks to the church and he talks about how, you know, science does all these awesome things. And then he talks about how conservatives are the ones, you know, but he's really talking about the church. He says, you know, we are the ones that respect the awesome power of lightning, like, right? That we like, that like, you have forgotten to respect that power. You've forgotten that there are traditions here. You've forgotten we need to take things slow. But the problem that I have is that it's always slowly compromising with leftist positions that I completely disagree with. So when you mentioned abortion, for example, in Texas, you're talking about positive rights, right? You're talking about the fact that the government has some form of responsibility or role in taking away tax dollars from other people that they did not consent to, and then giving them to other people to change the material conditions upon which they live in. And what I would say to people that go, oh, well, you're being a hypocrite between these two positions, if I was pro-life, which I'm an evictionist, so I'm not necessarily pro-life. Yeah, I have a very different position, libertarian position, but assuming I was pro-life, what I would say is, well, no, I am for the right of self-ownership and I am for the right of the body. And the child has a right of its own body. It has personhood. It has all of those things. And you don't get to murder or violate that right. But in no way, shape, or form am I required to give up my own right to my body and my own right to my labor to give money to other people non-voluntarily. Like I have no problem working on my own or donating to charities or companies setting up situations that are profitable because of marketing and advertisement campaigns for doing the right thing and stuff like that. Right? Like my argument would be, if we wanted to fix, you know, the issues of abortion in this country, well, more funding isn't really. I would argue first and foremost from a libertarian position of universal basic income. I would say that the reason so many people don't understand all of these assets and things is because it's all part of the submerged state. Is that there's all these programs, but you have to file these government programs and you have to justify that you're looking for work and you have to go through complicated processes, and they're not even like widely available information. You have to march down the Social Security office and pick out pamphlets so you can even know that half of these fucking government programs exist. Except welfare moms that love to abuse these programs, they know all about all these fucking programs, right? So I would argue to get rid of all of these programs and institute UBI, if we're going to do that, to the very least reduce the size and scope of the state and kind of fix the market-based solutions to these issues. And I would say that, like, you know, that this is a really big crawl that I have with conservatives, is that they're just constantly negotiating with the left and meeting them halfway. It's like, But if you look at if you stop looking at what's happening right now and you look at history over the last 100 years, what you will see is a constant negotiation between the right and the left, and the right constantly giving up and ceding ground almost every single time.
Yeah, and I've heard that argument be mentioned before, and I think the one thing that's super important is, where is that fine balance between compromise and an unfair compromise? You know, when is it you're giving way too much ground to the left versus when are you giving way too much ground to the right, or when is it an even compromise? And I think one thing that I had found, the most reasonable compromise that I had found, at least in terms of actual the legality of, like, say, abortion, for example, the most reasonable to me seems like viability. And the reason why I would say that specifically, the reason why I would say that is because it allows for the advancement of medical technology to potentially draw back that viability line.
You know what the definition of viability is, right?
The greatest, well, one of the great, like the percentage of likelihood that it basically would survive outside the womb, correct? That's the way I've understood it to be.
So once it's over 50%, which is to say that, you know, let's say between 21 and 24 weeks, it's unequivocally murder.
Yes, and that's why I was saying, like,
even though 24 weeks is viability. So I don't know that viability is a good compromise if we know that if we use viability as a compromise, what we're engaging in is de facto murder by every definition of the word.
Yeah, sure. So one of the things too is that, like, I think that as medical technology, that way, because the thing is too is a lot of times conservatives will try to draw, depending on the line, right? There's usually the heartbeat, there's usually the brain activity, there's usually conception at the very end. Mm-hmm. You got different things like that. I think when we're looking at it from a legal perspective, the reality of conception being like an actual, like, solid ban. And the other thing too on this, not to go too far off from this conversation, is when we talk about abortion, it's very important to understand what we currently have in place. And I think this gets misconstrued astronomically. When we talk about abortion, I've looked at many states. Many of them, as far as I've seen, none of them punish the mother criminally or civilly. And then second to that is that they always leave the room open for if the mother's having a medical emergency, an ectopic pregnancy. And then also they mention that some states even have the rape or incest clause in there. And then some actually have it where, and I believe most of them do, there's actually 43 states currently that ban abortion after viability for what I would call convenience sake. Unless it's a medical emergency, you can't get an abortion currently. So people who think Roe v. Wade makes abortion, no bars held, legal, are completely misconstrued.
I would disagree on almost everything here. And here's why.
Okay.
Here's why. First of all, there's a difference between enforcement mechanisms and the law, right? So New York is a great example. In New York, they watered down the enforcement mechanisms, right? So nurse practitioners, physician's assistants, and even midwives have the capacity to determining whether or not it's appropriate to give an abortion in terms of safety of the mother's health. And the problem, and the thing is that no district attorney is going to be stupid enough to take up cases where it's kind of clear and kind of obvious that the mother's health was not actually at risk here, right? So in New York City is an example in America where you basically have no holds bar abortions whenever you want, even though the law does indeed state that you can't have any abortions after viability unless the mother's health is at risk. There are people that are getting abortions in New York City because, you know, they have severe depression, right? Like determined by their OB, right? You know, you see what I'm saying? Like,
I forgot because you mentioned something earlier, and I meant to hit on that, and that was my bad. So one of the things too is I'm with you on the fact that, and some states have this. I can't name all of them, but I know that a few. I think it was Texas and Louisiana, specifically mentioned that after viability, the doctor has to do everything within his power, if it's after viability, to basically deliver it via a live birth, basically.
Yes. So this is evictionism.
C-section, yeah.
So this is the position of evictionism. And I would say what you mentioned, all of the arbitrariness, all of the lines, and then of course we already proved that portion between 21 weeks and 24 weeks is unequivocally murder, even though it's before viability. Because The youngest baby that's ever been born and successfully lived was 21 weeks, right? 24 weeks is considered viability. So any abortion that occurs from that period, whilst it may have already died on its own, if it was evicted, we know that at least some percentage of them would have been perfectly fine if they were evicted, and yet we murdered them anyways, right? So this is a pro-murder stance. Using viability is a pro-murder stance. And the problem that I have here is what I'm contesting with conservatism as a philosophy in law, and not using natural law and those principles, is that they're not based on any axiomatic positions. So what is reasonable becomes a negotiable term in law. And what we'll see is a constant fight between the left and the right, and a constant but slow march of more and more power and more of the law leaning towards the left's position. And so my position is simply this. There are only, as far as I can tell, there are only two principled positions, either evictionism or pro-life. Personally, I'm an evictionist. And so what I would say is abortion should be perfectly legal up to 6 weeks. And after 6 weeks, you have to evict the child. You do not have the right to take a hammer to the back of a child that has the ability to move, has the ability to sense pain, has the ability to react to stimuli, has, if we're talking post 11 weeks, has a primal streak in the beginning of a central nervous system, has its own heartbeat, fingers, toes, fingernails, right? You don't get to take an ice pick to the back of their skull and smash their fucking skull and pull them out piece by piece with clamps and suck them out with a vacuum. And then the pro-life position is also principled in its position. The way that it works with government, I agree with you. There's some really tricky, slippery slope with the pro-life position, not from a philosophy standpoint, but from the usage of government power. Because then it's like, okay, well, if it's murder, at that point, is poor diet like murder? Is like being fat murder? Is like smoking cigarettes murder? Right? Is like having a beer when you don't even know that you're pregnant murder? And therefore, we have to make sure that all women that are sexually active of childbearing age are legally not allowed to smoke cigarettes and drink alcohol. Like, you start getting into wild categories once you get to that point.
So one of the things I would say is I'll let you know, morally, I'm not really even okay or comfortable with anything past really even a heartbeat, or even really, like I've always said, my moral like framework is really a conception, but like I also like understand that there are given circumstances. So I'm not a no bars held like abortion guy, because I understand there are freak circumstances that should we make a flat out abortion ban, you would have some very consequential things happen, in the case of an ectopic pregnancy or whatever it may be. But I do want to mention too that like, oh God, I just passed my brain. Oh, the criminality side. So I think it's super, super important that we do not charge the mother for a variety of reasons. And for one of the reasons that I think that states do this really protect the mother is that when you go to a doctor, you're kind of putting your healthcare needs in their hands and relying on that doctor's expertise to give you that opinion.
Yeah.
And I think politically speaking as well, it's insane to try to charge the mother. And I've had literal debates on this with people where they're like, oh, well, if the DA charges them, then that's a problem with the law. It's like, no, that's a problem with the DA. If the DA is charging something they're not supposed to be charging, that's a problem with the DA. If it's explicitly carved out in the law that the mother cannot be charged, there are explicit like portions of the law that mention this, and the DA decides to charge, that's an issue with the DA. Vote that DA out. Get that DA disbarred. Do everything you can, because that DA is literally disobeying the law currently. People, we have a law in place that says you can't go over X speed limit, but people do it. It doesn't mean the law is wrong. It means the people doing it are wrong. But that's a whole other topic.
Yeah, you're right, because I disagree with speed limits, I think.
Yeah.
They're stupid.
But like,
science shows that they're stupid. They don't work. They don't prevent accidents. When you get rid of speed limits, you have less accidents. And the police can use their resources more valuable. The reason we have fucking speed limits on roads is not safety. The science proves that. The only reason we have speed limits is so that cops can sit on the side of the road and they can collect money for the state by charging people with going over the speed limit. Get rid of the speed limits. You don't need them. They're stupid.
Yeah, so a couple of things on I'll head on that one after I finish this one up with the abortion one. So the thing about the criminality thing is Louisiana just recently got in hot water for this. And this goes back to what I have my biggest issue with conservatives is that what they'll do is they'll pass this law and try to go to their constituents and say, look at what we did. When you look at Louisiana's law, what they did is they changed the fetal homicide law. They didn't change the health and safety code, which the health and safety code is where they take the portion of abortion. So what they did is that currently, and it says it in the bill, by the way, that currently the fetal homicide law starts at implantation. So if you, for example, if you have a murder case where a woman is murdered and she had a baby implanted. Exactly. So what they've done is they've moved it back from implantation to fertilization, which is wild to me, but that's what they do. And what they're doing is they're touting this as oh, look at our victory. But when you look, Louisiana's health and safety code still has that carve out for the mother exception. The mother still cannot be charged. And in fact, Louisiana has a very lax one because they still cover for cases of rape or incest. They still cover for health medical emergencies. They still offer Plan B. They still offer mifepristone and the other one, misoprostol or whatever it's called, which is the one up to 10 weeks. But to get to the point of what you were talking about with I've actually looked into this one, the idea that fines make up like a large amount of like the revenue for some cities. I've actually found that like when I look at the departmental budgets for their revenue sources, it's a small percentage. Yeah. Because that's one of the things I looked at in terms of their budget.
Yeah, no, but which if you want to, I'm not making the argument. I just want to be clear. I'm not making the argument that a majority or that like an incredibly large minority comes from fines and fees, right? A majority of their funding comes from, especially once you want to look at like, if you were to actually analyze real costs of some of the weaponry that's used and armor and vehicles that are given on loan, 100-year loan by the state, right? Which is basically they sell it to them for cheap, right? But if you were to look at like actual market costs, it would be even smaller, right? Which is most of their money comes from the state taxes and federal taxes. It doesn't come from, you're right. It doesn't come from fines and fees, but every little bit helps. And I think the other thing too is you have to recognize when you look into this, the disparity between smaller precincts and counties that have a stretch of highway or a major thoroughfare, and then one in the cities that don't, right? And this is a big reason why you don't see speed limits enforced as heavily in like downtown in a city. Part of it is because enforcing it would just cause more fucking traffic. But the other part of it is it's a much, much smaller percentage of their budget. So they don't stand to gain a lot by doing speeding tickets. But like a small country county that has like 6 police officers, right? Yeah. They put one of them on the fucking highway if they're allowed to, and it's within their jurisdiction, because they're going to get a significant portion of their budget from speeding tickets there because nothing happens in town and they don't get any damn money.
We have that. There's a place here in it's outside of Houston, but if you're going towards like San Antonio or Austin, there's a small town where the speed limit, literally, I kid you not, it's on a major freeway. Its speed limit goes from like 65 to like 35, like that, and you don't recognize it. And there's always a cop there. You know damn good well there's a cop there because obviously when you drop a speed limit from 65 to 35, you're gonna get people that are gonna be going way over the speed.
It's usually downhill.
Yes, yeah. So it's like
usually downhill. It's like dog. Like I'm like there's ice on the roads. Like I literally can't drive safely here by deaccelerating from 65 to 35 downhill. And you got me going 54 and a 35. Like go fuck yourself.
Yeah, it's wild. But like that's the other thing too. When you're talking about city budgets, I know we're kind of pivoting really quickly, but that's okay.
Well, I mean, we have an hour, and we're just let it freeform, guys. Every time I've talked to Doghouse Show, it's been like this. We just kind of bounce around. Like I could interrogate you, but you said some things that I disagree with that I would love to challenge in a debate at some point if you ever want to do one.
Sure.
But which is where your positions and morals come from and why I think they contradict with the state. But like for the most part, it's not like talking to Pisco where I'm like, where do rights come from? The government. And it's like, okay, they come from the government. So what you're saying is Hitler didn't violate the Jews' rights.
Let me explain something. When it comes to dealing with Pisco, I always have to be like, for example, when we had that round table with the one recently with Sprout, I was sitting there and I saw Pisco was in there. I'm like, fuck. I'm like, this is going to be bad. And because specifically we were talking about the transgender.
He's fine in a 1v1. He's fucking fine in a 1v1. I want to make that clear. Like when you have a 1v1 conversation with him, you can have a fairly honest and decent conversation and learn some shit and teach him some shit. in a round table, it's the fucking worst.
That's why when I saw that we were talking about a law, I'm like, if Pisco read this law, I'm fucked. I'm like, I know for a fact, like, because here's the thing, the law that is regarding like
not really
I
don't think
I have
that
to.
good.
Well, the thing is that like there's certain legal like principles and legal jargons that I'm not 100% familiar with, and I've had to do research on. So, for example, like if you would have met me with like mens rea, for example, I had an idea of what it was, but it took me having to like watch YouTube videos, dive into it. So if I saw mens rea mentioned somewhere in a law, I'd be lost because I didn't know what that time what that principle was.
Right.
So that's what I'm talking about. Is like he has that edge up on me where he has that legal understanding of these different principles, and so I can't combat him on those because I don't have a knowledge of it. And that's one thing I'm willing to do. Like, I'm not your Republican who's going to try to die on these dumb hills and be like, yeah, you're just wrong. You're just wrong. No, like, hey, if I don't know something, I don't know something, and I'm completely okay with admitting I don't know it. But yeah, like, so to what we were talking about earlier about the fines and stuff, this is something else that really bothered me. To going back to the ineptitude of people on the left is when we came to defunding the police. What I discovered when I was researching this stuff is that the defunding, what they did is that they had a line item for the budget. They wanted to do a project where they wanted to hire certain staff. They never ended up getting to it. So what they do is they go, okay, well, you know what? This fits our political convenience. So let's remove this line item that we were never going to touch to begin with. Let's just remove it. And then next thing you know, they're going to be like, look, guys, we defunded the police by $100 million. And you're like, yeah, but you didn't really do anything. You just took an already trash project and just relocated the funds. And this goes back to why
I'm for the abolishment of police personally.
And that's the thing, is that's okay to have that position as long as it's like, again, it's not this kind of like, but I mean, hey guys,
we're different from the left because they want community policing after that, which is fucking stupid. Unless you live in a small rural community or something. And we're like, no, like 75% of all of your policing is already done through private agencies. And the state has a monopoly. You recognize that monopolies suck. And they don't have any, the Supreme Court has decided that they don't have any constitutional requirement to protect citizens. Whereas citizens often do. They have qualified immunity, 1967 Pearson v. Ray. Some states have gotten rid of it at a state level, but not at a federal level. And you look at this and you go, this is clearly a recipe for disaster. Like, just let private property owners contract their own rules on their property and let private police enforce those laws. Because now they'll be beholden to the citizenry via being able to be sued. They'll be beholden to the individual that contracted them because there's a competition in the marketplace. So if they don't do what they're supposed to do, someone else will do it. It's just a dumb, like the idea that conservatives and this thin blue line that they have, or the lefties that think that like I look at both of these positions and I'm like, this is so stupid. Like, you're against monopolies and you think that the state does all these horrible things and you think that capitalism is based, if you're on the right, just open it up to the market. It's a better solution. It's so patently obvious.
Yeah. So one of the things I would say is like when it comes to like, policing, I'm glad you hit it because I was wondering when you invoked qualified immunity, even today, in today's day and age where we've had all this rage, people tend to not really understand what the hell qualified immunity really means. So I'm glad that you hit on it at the end because I was going to ask you about that, which is because that's what gets me is I'm like, when it comes to civil suits, I don't know if when it comes to like the remedy typically involves monetary damage or like monetary recovery.
No monetary. I would argue constitutionally or from a common law perspective that there's no remedy because the abusing party doesn't pay restitution. The state
well, and that was going to be that's what I was going to say too, is like when we look at like, for example, which by the way, you can still sue police officers. Even currently, you can still sue police officers and usually there has to be a qualified immunity hearing to determine whether or not you clearly violated that constitutional right or whatnot. But nonetheless, police officers do get sued and sometimes they actually do get held to account on it. The thing is that I don't know
depends on your state how difficult of a bar that is. Right, like Arizona is an example of a state where you can basically sue a police officer and they got to go to court. And the union helps them with like the police union in Arizona helps them, secure legal representation because they have the policing union in Arizona has lawyers on retainer, and so they just goes to court. And so instead of having a qualified immunity hearing and then having a oh my god, what is the hearing before to determine whether or not you
preliminary?
It's not preliminary.
Preliminary?
It's grand jury.
Grand jury.
Grand jury.
Oh, grand jury.
So like they'll do grand jury proceedings all the time, and then which is essentially taking the fucking place of qualified immunity court, if you ask me. But regardless, they'll go to the grand jury hearing and like have representation on both sides to determine to go to court, right? So I think Arizona does it the best. But and I think every state should do that. And maybe we could compromise with conservatives and the left in some regard to just get rid of this entire process and just have it be default that because the issue here is mostly this, right? The law enforcement officers at both the local and federal level are enforcing the laws of the state. They do not work for you. Do they not protect and serve you, right? Theoretically, they protect and serve you because you vote on laws that you want, but we live in a republic, so you don't even really vote in laws unless you're in the West and you have referendums, right? Like, and I mean like the West Coast, right? The rest of the country is voting for a representative that they hope supports laws. And of course, this is tyranny of the majority, because if you lose the election, you don't get any say in it, right? If it's 51-49. But regardless, theoretically, they protect and serve you. And I'm putting big quotes there because, you know, we have very different positions, but I'll move forward.
That's okay.
The problem is that they're enforcing the laws of the state on behalf of the state, right? And it's presumably on behalf of you, but they don't work for you. You can't go outside. You can't tell a police officer like, hey man, I need your help. Come help me. You know what I mean? Like you can't go to a police officer and be like, hey man, my lawnmower won't start. Like, come help me. Like, they don't work for you. They work for the government. And
they don't have to do it if they don't want to. They can if they choose. And we see it all the time with like
right.
basketball.
Right. And I think you see an incentive structure that's really, really, really corrupt in that right off bat. But it is further corrupted by the fact that when a police officer makes a mistake, if it's egregious enough, they're fired and they're blackballed. But if it's not quite egregious enough, right, it might get swept under the rug if no court case is involved, right? Or it might go to court and they might get fired and they end up, you know, going to another precinct somewhere else if it's not egregious enough, right? And so there's very low risk for the officers involved so long as they're sticking to each other, they're sticking to the code, and they're following the law with some regularity. And there's a lot of gray areas where they're shifting these things. And so when you sue, they're not directly financially responsible in any way for the actions that they do, unless you're talking about a state like Arizona where they might actually be sued. But even then, it's very unwise to sue the officer because the officer has no fucking money, right?
That's what I was gonna say, yeah.
Right? So it's like it would be dumb to sue the officer anyway. So what ends up happening is you sue the city then pays those damages, the city has a budget, and then the city may or may not either cut programs or increase taxes to deal with this situation because the city's not a business. The city doesn't have to live or die based off of its efficiency. It can just tax you more. And so when cops are bad, all you're doing in suing them is limiting the government programs and or increasing your own taxes, which is just more authoritarianism because of authoritarian cops. And there's a story that I remember from Baltimore of a police officer that talked about his proudest day in policing and why he quit. And I'm paraphrasing extremely, but basically what he did is he told a story of how he was out, just doing like regular, police officer speed trap shit. And he got a report from a woman, or like doing just doing patrol, right? He got a report from a woman that she was sexually assaulted. She was raped. Sorry. Takes her to the hospital. He stays with her at the hospital. He gets a report from her. He gets a rape kit done. And in her report, she gave some details, which was she remembered a lot of Coors Light, I think it was, but it might have been a different beer. So sorry, Coors Light. But it was a beer like that. It was like Miller Lite or Coors Light or something. She remembered that. She remembered certain bed sheets. She remembered a vehicle. She remembered the jersey that the man was wearing. And she remembers like what a community looked like. She had no idea where she was raped. Police officer had a hunch. He's like, I think I know what neighborhood that is. I'm not sure. I'm going to go drive around the neighborhood in that area. Goes to a gas station right by the neighborhood. Guy's picking that exact beer, wearing a jersey with the same car. Follows him. knocks on the door, asks if he can come in and talk to her about this woman. The guy panics, lets him in, walks in, sees the bed, sees the exact bed sheets and stuff that she was talking about, and the beer, and is like, fuck you, like, and the guy like ends up admitting it there, arrests him, takes him. Regular dude doing patrol, caught a fucking rapist, and fucking got a rape victim to the hospital in a rape kit. He was then chastised 2 days later for not having enough police interactions. Because the police interactions is more important. Because he may have tainted things, and that like this is something the detective should handle, and like you're not qualified to be doing that. Your job is to be getting enough police interactions, because interactions mean money, right? And he was like,
I'd have to look into that, yeah.
Fuck you, fuck all of this. This is a horrible system. And I think that things like that are part and parcel of our policing system, because we don't have a market solution to these things. We don't have competition.
Yeah, I think one of the things I'll say is, like, when it comes to policing, I'm very critical to a certain degree. Most people would say I'm pro-police to some regard, but I think for me, it's like when I look at these situations, I have to assess them one by one. I think that there's a lot of things that we can look at, for example, with policing that are definitely more at the community level than it is so much the state or the national level. If you see something like that, obviously there's a place for detectives. And that's the thing you're going to find about me. Like, I try to generally, like, that's how I approach politics. There used to be a time where you could invite someone on and have a conversation with somebody. But lately, it's like anytime you invite someone on, you're kind of clinching you're like, oh, are we going to be debating? And it's like, I don't like that.
Yeah, it happened with me with Econo Boy. It happened with, some other things. Or better yet, are you going to be the only person in the Twitch politics space after 2 months that calls out Queen Alexa for being a fucking groomer? And then you go on to Wick's channel to debate Professor Meathead, some new guy, some DGGer, and then Q&A portion pops up, and the first thing they do is bring in Queen Alexa, and it's like, all right, bro, like, I'm not gonna sit here and continue this shit charade. Like, I'm out.
And that's what sucks too, is that, like, for me, it's like I've engaged, like, my very first time ever doing a panel on Twitch, I had Lumiru, who now goes by Eva Unilove, who's now going by Lumiru.
I was like, wait a minute, no, she's still Lumiru. Yeah. She's gone from the Twitch politics space. Like, she does her own thing.
Yeah. So I had them on, and then I had Wild Man. I had a bunch of other people that are like pretty far left. Well, we're far left at that time. We were like, oh my god, these are far left. Now there's like crazy amount of people. But like, we could have a genuine conversation. You watch that video. I sent that video. Yeah, like I sent you that video before, like where it's like all of us are just chit chatting, and like I saw so many moments when I was rewatching that video where like, oh my god, like they could just dogpile on these particular niche little things. And that's why when you were mentioning to me all of these different things about policing, I could easily jump on all those and be like, oh, let's fact check this. Oh, let's go to this and let's check. But like, that's not the point of the conversation. Let's have a general conversation about the general thing. And I have no problem like saying, hey, look, maybe that's true. I have never researched it. I'm not going to try to debunk you here. Like, that's not my point. And so like, to the point of like policing, it's like, for me, I try to be very critical when I can. I try to look at all the, I'm the typical conservative that's like, let's look at all the facts. There are egregious crimes that happen by police. For example, I will never forget this one where the dude was in the wheelchair at Lowe's, and the more I looked into it, I'm like, this does not make the cop look good at all. This looks like if there was
he's running away, and he's like,
yeah, I'm like,
he's got a knife. He doesn't even have a fucking gun. No, he did have a gun, didn't he?
He may have had a gun.
Yeah, I think he had a gun.
I don't remember.
He was facing away from him. He shot him in the fucking back. Like, he didn't try and tase him. Like, there was so many things in that where it was like, what the fuck?
Well, and then get this. It got worse because when I was like, I saw this, I'm like, okay, I'm like, this looks bad. It is.
Let me dig it.
But let me dig it. And then it was one of those things where you dig in and you're like, oh shit, this is actually worse, because it turns out they chased him through the parking lot in a fucking wheelchair, running around the parking lot.
He went from Walmart to Lowe's. Like, the original incident was him stealing from Lowe's, and he didn't kill anybody or anything in Lowe's. He was just like, fuck you, I'm stealing, or at Walmart, and they were like, dude, you have to come back.
Well, here. I think he did brandish a weapon, to be fair. But either way, the fact that they had to chase him like throughout the entire parking lot, and then he starts to go into Lowe's, and then they don't just shoot him, they double tap him. Like, if you notice, it's wild because he'll go pop, 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 pop. And
yes,
you're like,
yes. When you listen to the audio, you're like, yo, did you pause and then continue after he was he was slumped over?
Yeah. To me, I was like,
to be fair, in the cops' defense, not that I want to defend cops because I'm pretty anti-police,
I got you.
but to be ever so slightly fair, your training is shit. And also, I also don't think they train to deal with people in wheelchairs and shootings. Not that you should be shooting those people, but like it might be hard to tell if they're falling down. You know what I mean? Because
no, that one was worse too, though, because the double tap came as he was this way. He wasn't like this, and it was like pop, 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 and he was still standing up. It was like he started to slump over, and the double tap came as he was leaning over, and you're like,
yes. I'm trying to be as charitable as I can be, but like that cop belongs in prison.
I was like, because that's the thing about self-defense and that's the thing you learn about like in self-defense. There's still things that can be maybe self-defense in the grand scheme of things, but by the minutia of the law, like if the dude is running away, for example, even if he's robbed your home and he's running away, double tapping the dude in the back can still land you a murder charge because of the fact that he's facing away from you. So it's very, very, and I'm like, this cop, if there's any case that deserves to go in front of a grand jury, it's this one. At the very least, put this in front of a grand jury. But
I do think I would say, you know, if we were going to come to some consensus, right, here in this conversation, I would ask you, right? I think my biggest problem that I have with conservatives is philosophy. I think that the left has a philosophy. Now, it is not a philosophy that every individual, it's a collectivist philosophy. And the strength of a collectivist philosophy of slave morality, from a Nietzschean perspective, right, of this neo-Marxist philosophy that is promulgated the left, is that because it's a collectivist philosophy, it doesn't require an individual to understand the entirety of the philosophy. It only requires the individual to embody portions of the philosophy, right? And so what we have is this disparate Marxist philosophy that has taken over a majority of the left. And I know a lot of people will challenge me on that and say, well, like, no, a majority of the left aren't Marxists. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is they engage in Marxist materialist dialectics. What I'm saying is that they have an oppressed oppressor narrative. What I'm saying is that they have a belief in equity as opposed to equality of opportunity, which I think are both bad, but equity's worse, right? And when you put these pieces together, they then have specific things that they're passionate about, and they're somewhat reasonable in everything else. But as a collective, as a group, what you have is a neo-Marxist philosophy that is engaging in a spearhead towards destruction of the West. What you have on the right is you have Christianity dying. And Christianity, to some extent, used to be a bulwark to these bad philosophies. Whereas the objectivists might call it pre-modernist, right? And because of this dying, what you have is conservatives have values now. They no longer have principles. And they no longer have a deep philosophical understanding of laws or government or of their worldview. Instead, some of them are Christian and some of them are conservative by default based off of their personality and their predilections. And so I would challenge any conservative that cares deeply that they've got to start learning philosophy. Because when I listen to you, I listen and I hear I have certain values and I have certain principles. And then when I hear you describe government and politics, you're willing to negotiate with those values and principles for the sake of good governance for all. And I think that has been the greatest weakness of conservatism in the last 100 years. And it's getting exponentially worse as the left gets more power over institutions, because the left didn't used to own a majority of the media. The left didn't used to own all of the universities. The left didn't used to own, because of the universities pumping out people from this philosophy, this consequentialism and like certain Marxist doctrines, they didn't used to own the majority of the executive branch of unelected kind of like, you know, the deep state, right? But they do now. Yeah. They do. They own all of these institutions. And now they own social media. And the left is losing its values in Christianity, and instead, the right is losing its Christianity. And I think it's really important that the right wakes up philosophically and starts supporting their principles without negotiating those principles. If you are a pro-life right-winger, there should be no negotiation from you. You should either separate in your own state that believes in these things. You should we have got to stop negotiating with our principles. And I think that's the biggest problem that I see in conservatives today is it's a reactionary news article, clickbaity, oh my God, they're coming after the kids, and not like, this is what we believe. You can't go against this because we believe this, period.
Yeah. And, you know, I think what you mentioned with the pro-life and the principle base. So, like, principally, I'm probably pro-life, right? But the one thing is that, like, I think that what makes it so difficult is that we already have a current legal framework that we have to work within. And so even if I wanted to sit here and say, like, we should remove abortion all the way back to, like, straight conception, realistically speaking, there's no real clear path that would be, because also the question would be too is, does making exceptions, like, for example, you know, the morning after pill, for example, like the thing like that, where my morals are as, hey, I'm pro-life, I'm not, you know, plan B would go against that principle basically, but also on the other hand, I have to kind of look at the reasonableness as well and go, like, is plan B, like, so am I okay with bending my principle a little bit for the legal sake and saying, hey, plan B is fine? Or should I be okay with, like, for example, medical emergencies where we do have it, fortunately, but the way that I kind of justify this is saying,
it's
look,
the principles. No, it's really simple. Yeah. It's principles. Plan B prevents contraception. It doesn't kill fertilized egg. So if you believe that life begins at fertilization, right, or conception, you know, whichever. Conception is kind of a dumb one, right? But fertilization makes sense, right? So if you're philosophically based on that, then there's no reason to care about Plan B.
Well, so the one thing I would say too is that, like, I think the exception to this is that being pro-life, I would still want the priority to be that there are two lives on the table that we both need to give equal consideration. And so I think that's the big caveat to this entire thing, is that are there any options after the fertilization, after the conception, that we have, you know, the baby can survive, right? Can we take that little tiny fertilized egg, take it out of the mother's womb, and then all of a sudden let it grow? We just can't. So what do we do in that point? Do we wait and force the mother then to carry that child all the way to say 6 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever we determine legally, and say, all right, now let's take the baby out and put it into foster care? It's a weird road. And so that's where, like I said, it's like, principally I'm pro-life, but I also understand that there's some weird things that can go on with this. But I don't want to get too far into that.
The libertarian, I do want to engage just for a second, but
yeah, absolutely.
As Casimir points out, and I am coming to your position, river crossings, honestly, Casimir, I've thought about it a lot, and it does make sense, but it doesn't make sense under the law, but it does make sense from a contract perspective. But anyways, yeah, I mean, we are giving them equal consideration under the rights. Like there's like, and this is the thing too, is that the right constantly loses because it stops regarding its principles. It starts negotiating. No conservative should ever utter the words, unless in irony or making fun of, women's rights or trans rights. There are no such thing as trans rights. There are no such thing as women's rights. Anyone that says, well, I believe in women's rights, you should immediately go, welcome to the left. You're not a conservative. And when they say why, be like, because I believe in human rights, or from your position, I believe in the right of self-ownership, or from your position, there are God-given rights. The right to the body, the right to freedom of association, the right to discrimination, the private property stems from these rights. But there's no such thing as a woman's right. There's no such thing as a trans right.
When I was saying mother's right, I want to be clear. I don't know if that's where that stemmed from, but the mother's right, when I meant that, is that the right specifically there wasn't that the mother has like a special. No, you're okay. You're okay. The mother's rights, I'm not saying that mother has a specific special like bucket of rights. It's more so that they have the mother has a right to life, for example, but the baby has a right to life. And so we have that situation where, in the rare 1% circumstance that we have a fucking medical emergency, that now the mother's life is at danger, it should not be, keep in mind, should not be the route to depending on the stage, because obviously if we have a medical emergency, like an ectopic pregnancy at like 2 weeks, that's a little bit different. But if we have like a second and third trimester, or even like post 6 weeks where the baby can still be taken out, we need to prioritize that baby's life as well.
Yeah,
that baby's
that's
life
my
has
position.
the right life.
That's evictionism, right?
Yeah.
And so that's exactly what we're talking about here, right? Is your views on what the government should and shouldn't do should be based in philosophy, because it's a philosophical question, right? It's not a legal or policy question. The moment that the right concedes that it's a policy question based off of outcomes is the moment that the right loses. Period.
Yeah, and that's what's kind of like, because I agree with you. I've heard this sentiment before, and I know I'm on borrowed time right now, but
maybe on your end, but we're fine.
Yeah, I know y'all. Yeah, I know y'all are good on y'all's end. So I'll kind of wrap it up in this way. It's kind of back to where we originally started, which was the principles idea. It's a struggle because I'm not somebody that's looked into philosophy. I have recently started to kind of dabble in it a little bit, but I typically try to stay away from it because I really want other people to kind of form that for me, I guess. I generally have some general principles that I kind of adhere to.
It's the most honest shit I've ever heard.
Yeah, like I leave it up to people to make that decision for me. I'm like, look, at the end of the day, like, whether I fall, like you just said, well, you sound more like a paleo lib. It's like, well, like I that's what it sounds like. Hey, cool, man. Like, I'm not gonna sit here and argue with you that I'm not a paleo lib. Like, hey, if I'm a fucking paleo lib, I've had fucking people like Redneck call me a fucking like far left commie. Okay, it's wild to me, and I'm just like sitting here, and it's like, you know, to me, it's like it's more important to attack the issue at hand than to sit here and get in. And this is me. I know you probably love philosophy more than I do, but like to me, it's more interesting and more important for me to at least attack the issue at hand. If we're talking about a bill or someone's making this hyperbolic debate, like we were saying with Dylan, for example, to me, instead of sitting here and going, hey, Dylan, listen, all right, I'm part of like the philosophy tube. Okay. So we want to talk about the philosophy of formula being given to mothers. To me, it's like, you know, I'm just going to tell you my opinion, and if that opinion happens to put me on the fucking left of the spectrum, so be it. That's just the way I float. I'm not worried about R or D or left or right.
I'm not talking about philosophy from the perspective of like engaging in a philosophical discussion.
Okay.
What I'm talking about is, okay, I look at HR 7990 and HR 7991, and then I say, they're bad. And then they go, well, why are they bad? But, you know, like we got to do something where we like, pause. It is stealing money from people to give to the FDA, and it is the FDA and CDC that caused this problem in the first place, and it is anti-free market capitalism. These are positions I will not fucking budge from. You cannot go this. Yeah. That is being, for lack of a better word, it's being based, right? But it's being based on your philosophical positions, right? And that's what I mean. I don't mean that you need to educate or engage in like, you know, praxis from a philosophical position. What I mean, or like in teaching philosophy to others or engaging the argument at that level, what I mean is I think it's really important that we start viewing what is it that we actually value, what is it that we actually believe, and in deepening those things and deepening our understanding of those things, so that when we talk from the right, if you will, because a lot of people would say I'm right wing, we're right wing anarchists, so we're kind of in a whole totally different position, but we are still right wing. I would say I'll accept that label, but it's like, it's also your understanding of right left doesn't really fit me. But regardless, coming to the table with that in mind, that no, I will not violate these positions. There's something I give to the left all the time when I talk about this, which is I have always said I'm not going to vote for anybody. Well, not always, but I'm saying it now, and I've said it in the past. I'm not going to vote for any Republican ever again unless they can prove that they have a track record of reducing government power and of reducing regulation. Why? Because that is the only direction I'm willing to go in. And so from the left, you know, they say, oh, well, you got to pick the lesser of the two evils, right? And I say, okay, pick the lesser of two evils. Imagine for a moment that Bernie Sanders is on the ticket. You vote for Bernie Sanders in a giant blue wave, and he's going to make Medicare for all happen. We're going to get rid of private insurance, and you vote for that. And they're like, hell yeah. And I'm like, okay, what happens when Republicans take over? And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, Republicans are going to take over. There's going to be a red wave. and then there's going to be a Republican president with a Republican Congress. You think they're going to get rid of that and bring us back to private insurance? No. They're going to keep that government power. Except now what they're going to do is they're going to make HRT and GnRH androgens illegal, right? Hormone replacement therapy and puberty blockers. And they're going to say it's illegal in the United States. And they have full control of the healthcare now. So when you voted for healthcare for all, what you actually voted for was to destroy trans rights. And you have to own that. You're a transphobe and you're a bigot. And then they're like, that's fucking absurd. They get all mad. It's like, but no, this is what it means to give the state power, is that power is then utilized against you.
It's the classic RBG argument.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
No, you go ahead if you want to.
I was going to say, yeah, the RBG argument was like the whole Obama should have gotten rid of or coerced RBG to step down and we wouldn't have had the Trump nominee. It's like, well, you put them in place. It's funny.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I know what you're saying though. Yeah.
Right, but it's at the end of the day, if the right doesn't learn philosophy and learn to stick to its principles, it will constantly negotiate based off of what is reasonable in the Overton window at the current date. And it's going to keep moving in that direction. And I think the biggest thing we can say is to do that. But no, I think you should read Jesus Christ. I was going to say Man, Economy, and State, but that's a terrible book to suggest to somebody.
Anatomy of the State?
Anatomy of the State, thank you. You should check out Anatomy of the State on Mises.org. It's only 70 pages. And I think it gives a really good 1,000-foot view of what super hardcore libertarians believe. But I think it might be an interesting read for you nevertheless.
Absolutely. And obviously I'm out of time, but it was awesome talking with you, man. And like I said, there are obviously a lot of those points that we talked about that I could definitely get on, more in depth. But I got Doggo going nuts. So, let's see.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Well, hang out in the Discord. There's a lot of interesting conversations happen in the Discord, man. I don't mean in VC. I mean just in general. There's a lot of
yeah. No, I got you.
But it's
yeah,
nice
absolutely. I'll be in there.
How long do you think you're gonna stay here on Twitch?
Listen, okay. I do my stream once a year, okay, so it's already over. I did my 2-week streak. I'll try to be back on the next year, but we'll see. We'll see. I'll be on around Twitch, though. I'll be on some panels or something. It always happens. People get the word out that I'm the most base conservative and stuff, so we'll see.
But I think I'm the most base conservative, and I happen to be a libertarian.
There you go. All right, man. Well, y'all take care. It was a pleasure speaking with you, man.
It's cool having you.
All right. Yes, sir.
You just watched a clip from our Twitch channel, Fabian Liberty. If you like content like this, please like and subscribe here on YouTube, or go ahead and give us a follow on twitch.tv/Fabian Liberty.